Footballers get criticized for everything: bad form, bad attitude, bad decisions. But very few players in history were despised for something as absurd as being too good-looking, and almost none paid the price the way David Ginola did, because no matter how brilliantly he played, and he was exceptional, people refused to take him seriously. Johan Cruyff once called him the best player on the planet, yet fans still claimed he cared more about shampoo commercials than football. At first glance, that sounds harmless, petty even, but here's the part people don't talk about. That narrative didn't just follow Ginola, it destroyed him. It turned public opinion against him so violently that millions were waiting for him to fail. Every touch was dissected, every risk was judged, and when he finally made a mistake, just one, it wasn't treated as an error. It was treated as treason. They called him an assassin. They said he murdered French football. They turned him into the most hated man in the country and pushed him out of France entirely. Ginola would spend the rest of his career in exile, desperately trying to prove himself, only to be mocked even harder when he tried. And yet, ironically, that rejection forced him to reach heights so outrageous that one day he would dismantle Manchester United's treble-winning side almost by himself, shocking Sir Alex Ferguson so deeply that decades later he still talks about it. Because surpassing expectations wasn't something Ginola did occasionally. It was the story of his life. From the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. At just 16 years old, he was released by Nice, dismissed as too small, too thin, too fragile to ever survive at the top level. For most players, that would have been the end of the dream. For Ginola, it was barely the opening scene. 1 year later, he was making his professional debut. 2 years after that, he was lifting the Toulon tournament with France's under-20 team, outshining future legends like Hristo Stoichkov and claiming the Player of the Tournament award. Overnight, half the country became convinced they were watching the birth of a generational leader, and that belief only grew stronger. The season after Toulon, Ginola somehow dragged SC Toulon to an astonishing fifth-place finish in Ligue 1, ahead of giants like Marseille and PSG. Then he returned to the Toulon tournament and somehow raised the bar again, scoring 5 goals in just 4 matches and leading France to successfully defend their title. By that point, virtually every major club in the country wanted him: Monaco, Bordeaux, Marseille. The path was clear. The smart move was obvious. So of course, Ginola did the opposite. Instead of choosing stability and prestige, he signed for Matra Racing, a club most people barely remember today. On paper, it was supposed to be a revolutionary project, bankrolled by French billionaire Jean-Luc Lagardère and featuring iconic names like Enzo Francescoli alongside Ginola. In reality, it turned into chaos. Within 2 years, the club was relegated. Lagardère pulled out. Financial problems piled up. The project collapsed. The club rebranded and eventually fell all the way down into the amateur leagues. And yet, even in the middle of that wreckage, Ginola refused to sink. That very same season, he carried Matra Racing all the way to the French Cup final, nearly stealing the trophy with a dramatic extra-time goal, only for the dream to slip away at the very end. Surely after surviving that disaster, he'd learned his lesson. Surely now he'd choose safety. A powerhouse, a club built to last, right? Not quite. Ginola signed for Brest, almost the only club in France that matched Matra Racing in instability. Brest had gone from the best season in their history to relegation to a resurgence, all within 4 chaotic years before Ginola even arrived. And true to form, disaster followed. Just 10 months after he joined, despite finishing 11th on the pitch, Brest were relegated off it due to financial collapse. Protests erupted. Fans stormed the field. By December, the club was bankrupt, dissolved, and erased. Ginola was clubless. Again. Eventually, he did what everyone had been waiting for and signed with PSG. Even then, controversy followed him. He had rejected Marseille before choosing Paris, a decision that looked even worse when Marseille lifted the Champions League just a year later. But by then, trophies were no longer the biggest problem. From the moment he arrived in Paris, Ginola won over the fans. No small feat in a city notorious for its brutal standards. Inside the dressing room, though, it was a different story. His relationship with George Weah, the team's biggest star, was so strained that teammates claimed the two didn't even shake hands. And yet, once the whistle blew, none of that mattered. On the pitch, they were unstoppable. In their first full season together, Ginola and Weah led PSG to their 3rd French Cup, finished just 4 points shy of a historic league title, and delivered the club's greatest European run to date, even knocking out Real Madrid along the way. Paris adored him. France did not. To the wider public, Ginola was vain, arrogant, self-obsessed. But those who actually knew him told a very different story. Yes, he sometimes struggled to balance football with his growing celebrity, but at his core he was easygoing, kind, obsessed with the game, and desperate to win. The truth was simpler. People didn't hate Ginola because of who he was. They hated him because of how effortlessly everything seemed to fall into his lap. He played football, and stadiums erupted. He walked down the street, and women swarmed. He appeared in a shampoo commercial for 10 seconds, and a six-figure check followed. To the outside world, life looked unfairly easy for David Ginola. He was handsome, talented, famous, and rich, the man who had it all. And nothing breeds resentment faster than watching someone live the life you'll never touch. But that gift was also a curse. His face, his fame, his lifestyle, all of it blinded people to the one thing he had ever truly wanted to be. Not a celebrity, not a model, not a marketing icon, just a footballer. And then, in November of 1993, everything collapsed because of a single decision. One moment, one cross. Had it been anyone else, the storm would have passed in a few days, a week maybe. But because it was Ginola, because France had been waiting for an excuse, the punishment lasted a lifetime. France hadn't appeared at a World Cup since 1986. 12 years of absence weighed heavily on the nation's shoulders, and all they needed to qualify for the 1994 tournament was a draw against Bulgaria. On paper, it sounded manageable. In reality, that Bulgarian side was the greatest generation the country had ever produced. And as the clock crept into injury time, the score remained locked at 1-1. Fear had replaced confidence. Survival mattered more than style. Then Ginola won a free kick on the right edge of Bulgaria's box. Everyone knew what was expected. Take the ball to the corner, kill the clock, do the ugly thing. But Ginola had never played football to survive. He played to express himself. Fear had no place in his game. So instead of hiding, he crossed the ball into the box. It was cleared. And just 16 seconds later, Emil Kostadinov fired the shot that condemned France to another World Cup spent at home. It was a nightmare, and it needed a villain. Ginola was perfect for the role. The outrage was immediate, violent, and deeply personal. And no one sharpened the blade faster than France's manager, Gérard Houllier. Their relationship had been toxic long before that night. Houllier despised what Ginola represented: the flair, the freedom, the refusal to obey rigid systems. To him, Ginola wasn't expressive. He was irresponsible, not creative, tactically naive. In fact, Ginola hadn't even started the match. Houllier didn't trust him enough to put him on the pitch in a game that could cost him his job. And perhaps that fear, the knowledge that his position was slipping away, pushed Houllier to do the unforgivable. While most managers would have protected their player, explained the chaos of football, reminded everyone that no one could predict the future, Houllier chose execution. In his post-match interview, he blamed Ginola without hesitation. "With 30 seconds left, we were stabbed in the back," he told the press. The referee already had the whistle in his mouth. What Ginola did was a crime against the team. He sent a missile through the heart of French football. Our final hope died today, and he was the assassin. Those words weren't criticism. They were a death sentence. By the next morning, the newspapers had delivered the verdict. David Ginola was no longer a footballer. He was the assassin of French football. And soon after, Houllier banished him from the national team entirely. One mistimed cross erased an entire career in blue. But when you strip away the hysteria and look at the play again, the truth is impossible to ignore. France weren't exposed. 7 players were behind the ball. Multiple defenders had chances to stop the counterattack. It never should have reached that point. And the only reason France were desperately clinging to a draw in the first place was because 5 days earlier, they had somehow lost 3-2 to Israel, a team that hadn't won any of their previous 8 matches. Ginola had even scored in that game to give France the lead, and once he was substituted, the team collapsed again, conceding in the final minute. What happened against Bulgaria wasn't the failure of one man. It was the collapse of a mentally fragile team that crumbled under pressure and needed someone to blame. Ginola understood that better than anyone. "I was taught that football is a team game," he later said. "So I ask myself, why do they blame me for the failure of an entire country? That question will haunt me for the rest of my life." The only small consolation was that Houllier was sacked anyway, despite his attempts to divert the blame. But the damage was already done. His assistant, Aimé Jacquet, took over, and he shared the same distrust, the same resentment, the same cold view of Ginola. The ban was softened over time. Ginola was called up for a few friendlies and qualifiers here and there. After all, alongside Papin and Cantona, he was still one of the biggest names in French football. And the irony? At the end of that very year, Ginola was voted French Player of the Year. Somehow, despite the hatred, despite the exile, despite being branded a traitor, he was officially recognized as the best player in the country. What followed was the greatest football of his life. The next season, he carried PSG to just their second league title ever, claiming the Player of the Season award along the way. Then he dragged them to the Champions League semi-finals, eliminating Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Bayern Munich. Spanish fans were so mesmerized they gave him a new name, El Magnifico. While the nation treated him like a pariah, Ginola was delivering the greatest era in PSG's history. And yet France remained unmoved. 2 years passed. The wound never healed. The hatred never faded. Ginola felt like a stranger in his own country. So when the season ended, he finally began looking for a way out. And when he left, everything changed. At 28 years old, he was about to reach a peak he'd never known. Johan Cruyff, his childhood idol, called him relentlessly. Barcelona was one signature away. Fate once again intervened. The Bosman ruling hadn't yet come into effect. Cruyff couldn't offload Stoichkov or Hagi. Barcelona were blocked from signing another foreign player. Time ran out. PSG grew impatient. So Ginola did what he'd always done. He shocked everyone. He followed the path of Cantona and fled to England. He rejected Arsenal. He chose Newcastle United instead, simply because his father adored Kevin Keegan. For just £2.5 million, England unknowingly welcomed a man the French had cast aside. And from that moment on, David Ginola stopped trying to be forgiven and started becoming unforgettable. What followed would go down as one of the greatest bargains the sport has ever seen. That summer, 61 players were transferred for higher fees than David Ginola. It's hard to argue that even a handful of them delivered anything close to his impact at Newcastle. When he first arrived at training, the dressing room didn't quite know what to make of him. As Keith Gillespie later recalled, French football barely made the news back then, so many of the players had no idea who Ginola even was. Then he walked in, sunglasses on, looking more like a film star than a winger. The whispers started immediately. Are we sure this guy's a footballer? Those doubts didn't survive the first training session. Within minutes, it became painfully obvious that Newcastle hadn't signed just another player. They'd signed a phenomenon. Kevin Keegan's Newcastle were already known as the Entertainers, and Ginola fit that identity like destiny. If there was one thing he was born to do, it was captivate people. After his first pre-season appearance, the entire city was buzzing. By the end of August, he was already named Premier League Player of the Month. 15 games into the season, Newcastle sat 5 points clear at the top of the table, having lost just once, scoring more goals than anyone else. Ginola wasn't just shining, he was the best player in England. But this story, like so many of his, refused to end happily. After 6 months that felt like paradise, everything began to unravel. Newcastle's lead ballooned to 12 points, and then slowly evaporated. Week by week it slipped away. With 6 matches left, Manchester United surged past them, lifted the title, and Eric Cantona snatched the Player of the Year award from Ginola's grasp. It was cruel, familiar, almost inevitable. As Newcastle collapsed, Barcelona came calling again, desperate to correct their mistake, offering £6 million for Ginola. Kevin Keegan shut the door instantly. The only way Ginola was leaving, he said, was if someone shattered the British transfer record. Ginola pleaded. He reminded Keegan that at 29 years old, anyone would dream of playing for one of the biggest clubs in the world. Keegan understood, but told him he couldn't do it. The fans were still furious about Andy Cole's sale. Selling Ginola too, he said, would get him crucified. Then came the real betrayal. Midway through the following season, Keegan walked away from the club without warning. No explanation, no goodbye. Ginola later said it felt like being stabbed in the back. The irony was brutal. His replacement, Kenny Dalglish, didn't see eye to eye with Ginola at all. Desperate, Ginola personally called Barcelona, begging them to try one last time. But by then, everything had changed. Cruyff was gone. Bobby Robson was gone. Louis van Gaal had taken over, and he had no interest in signing a 30-year-old winger. There was interest from Real Madrid, but Ginola had always been a romantic. Barcelona was the dream. Without it, the magic disappeared. PSG wanted him back, but returning to France felt unthinkable. So in one final twist that shocked everyone, Ginola joined Tottenham Hotspur, a club battling relegation at the time. Watching his former Newcastle teammates play in the Champions League hurt. Watching France lift the World Cup without him the following summer hurt infinitely more. But Ginola found purpose in North London. As he once said, fans would tell him, "We play terrible football, but it's worth coming to the stadium just to watch you." That responsibility became his fuel. The following season, even with the arrival of George Graham, a manager many believed would suffocate his freedom, Ginola produced the greatest campaign of his career. He was, without question, the most entertaining player in the country. Some said he could perform miracles, and maybe they were right. He dragged an 11th place Tottenham side to a League Cup trophy and European qualification. That wasn't just impressive, it was absurd. Manchester United won the treble. Beckham finished second in the Ballon d'Or. Ginola barely got a nomination, and yet when the votes were counted, it was Ginola who won both the PFA and FWA Player of the Year awards. No player outside the top two had ever done that. Ever. Holding the trophy, he finally answered his critics. "This is proof of my dedication," he said. "To those who say I care more about modeling than football, that's not true. You don't become Player of the Year at 32 if you're not fully focused on your job." Even Johan Cruyff years later still called him the best player in the world. And yet football showed him no mercy. 1 year later, George Graham, who never truly accepted him, pushed him out of the club. Ginola was furious. The fans were furious. It felt like a betrayal too big to fix. He joined Aston Villa, only to discover he'd been signed by the board against the manager's wishes. When asked why Ginola wasn't playing, the manager told the press he was overweight. Ginola responded the only way he knew how. He scored in the next match, and ripped off his shirt, revealing a sculpted six-pack. Many things could be said about David Ginola. Fat was not one of them. After a brief 7-game spell at Everton, he retired at 35. But the scars never faded. He never forgave Gérard Houllier. When Houllier doubled down years later in his autobiography, even calling Ginola a bastard, Ginola was forced to take legal action. All of it. The exile, the hatred, the wasted World Cups, the broken dreams, all because of one cross. And maybe that's the cruelest part of David Ginola's story. Not that he made a mistake, but that football never allowed him to be anything more than that moment, even when he spent the rest of his life proving he was so much greater. But if you would like to know the horrifying truth about Hatem Ben Arfa that is scarier than you think, click the video link on screen now.